The stage lights glimmered across the glossy floors of a bustling television studio in Los Angeles. A diverse crowd filled the plush seats, leaning forward with excited anticipation for the night's headline guest. The set's vibrant decor, framed by large video panels displaying stylized versions of the show's logo, hummed with electric energy. A triumphant blast of the opening jingle signaled the start of the broadcast, and the audience erupted into applause. The liberal talk show host Cameron Reed strolled onto the stage wearing a sleek tailored suit and a wily grin that often made his commentary all the more biting. He thrived on controversy, relishing the chance to challenge high-profile figures in politics, entertainment, and beyond. That evening, he had invited Clint Eastwood, a Hollywood legend known for his iconic Western stardom and tough guy persona, to appear as a guest. Rumors had circulated earlier that day that Cameron intended to confront Eastwood about his conservative politics, older age, and any perceived outdated beliefs. The audience, primed by social media whispers, waited on the edge of their seats to witness sparks fly. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Cameron beamed into the camera, greeting his viewers at home with a polished patter he'd perfected over years in the business. The host's voice had the persuasive timbre of someone who lived for the stage. He introduced the night's topics in broad strokes before finally building to the big reveal of his esteemed guest. The mention of Clint Eastwood's name elicited a scattered mixture of applause and curiosity from the live audience. Although Eastwood's legacy was undeniable, this particular crowd included plenty of viewers who skewed politically left, eager to see how he would field questions from a figure as sharp-tongued as Cameron Reed. A hush settled over the studio as Eastwood emerged, wearing his signature stoic expression. He moved with a grace that belied his age, stepping with measured confidence toward the center of the stage. Though his hair was now silver, his posture remained strikingly upright, and his eyes still held that cool, enigmatic glint that had made him a star decades ago. The bright lights softened as the two men shook hands. Polite applause spread throughout the stands, some of it genuine and some laced with curiosity about how the exchange would unfold. Eastwood lowered himself into the plush guest chair, crossing one leg over the other as he settled in. Cameron, always the showman, settled into his own host's throne, leaning forward with obvious excitement. Cameron began with a round of benign questions about Eastwood's filmography, a career that had spanned multiple eras of Hollywood history. He asked about directing techniques and the challenges of acting in physically demanding roles. Eastwood answered with concise humility, sprinkling in anecdotes about life on set with various co-stars. The crowd chuckled at a couple of lighthearted memories, and for a moment, the atmosphere felt disarmingly friendly. Yet everyone sensed that this cordial warm-up was a prelude to the host's more pointed lines of inquiry. Cameron, never known for restraint, was biding his time. Eventually, Cameron's face took on the familiar mischievous glint that foretold tension. He steered the conversation toward current events and political ideals, referencing Eastwood's known right-leaning stance. The host framed his words in a way that seemed designed to provoke. He implied that Eastwood's viewpoints were relics of a bygone era, and then tossed out a snide remark about Eastwood's advanced age, suggesting he might be out of touch with modern values. Though the audience let out a murmur of discomfort at the frankness of the question, Cameron smiled. He enjoyed dancing on the edge of propriety. Eastwood listened without flinching, his eyes fixed calmly on the talk show host. The camera captured the flicker of something akin to amusement crossing Eastwood's face. He was a man long accustomed to direct confrontation. The moment stretched as he paused, allowing the tension to build before answering. When he finally spoke, he did so in an even, measured tone that commanded attention. Age, he pointed out, was a natural progression in life, not a barrier to understanding or an excuse for dismissiveness. He'd watched countless social movements rise and fall, had seen the transformation of Hollywood from the 1950s to the modern day, and had lived through a range of political seasons. The audience hung on every word, sensing the weight of his perspective. Cameron, skilled at reading an audience, shifted in his chair. He tried to maintain his swagger but found it challenged by the gravitas of someone who had seen and done so much. Undeterred, he took another shot. This time, he questioned Eastwood's stance on certain social issues, hinting that they might be deemed problematic by the younger generation. The host quoted recent viral tweets, referencing Eastwood's name in a context meant to portray him as behind the times. Cameron's voice took on a provocative lilt as he cornered Eastwood to respond. Meanwhile, the cameras kept rolling, capturing the charged atmosphere. The star maintained his composure, that trademark calm that had powered him through countless interviews over the decades. He calmly stated that while society should always evolve and strive for fairness, labeling people without deeper understanding served no one. He conveyed that his ultimate concern was the freedom of individuals to express their beliefs and pursue their dreams without government or societal imposition. His speech was thoughtful and unhurried. He refused to yield to cheap provocations, maintaining an aura of self-assured poise. Some spectators began to sense that Cameron's typical rhetorical tactics, interrupting, using sensationalism, might not be so effective this time around. The host tried to regain control of the conversation by throwing out a barrage of statistics and half-formed arguments, hoping to box Eastwood into a corner. He even cast aspersions on the star's directorial choices, insinuating that some of his films promoted a worldview that no longer fit the modern cultural landscape. He suggested that Eastwood's brand of rugged individualism was out of sync with an era that valued collectivity and empathy. A hush fell over the crowd, a mixture of tension and empathy for the man on stage. While some in the audience might have agreed with certain angles of the critique, the pointed tone was becoming increasingly clear. Eastwood let the words hang in the air again before making his move. The patience he had displayed so far made his eventual retort all the more potent. With that cool confidence that had defined so many of his on-screen characters, he leaned forward slightly in his seat, his gaze locked onto Cameron. He began by acknowledging that everyone is entitled to their own perspective, that the world is big enough to accommodate a diversity of voices. He then offered a mini-lesson in respect, something that he believed had gone missing in modern discourse. Civility, he said, wasn't just about sugarcoating one's opinions, but rather about understanding the common humanity even in disagreement. A few audience members clapped at that, surprising the host. Unwilling to lose momentum, Cameron seized the brief applause to pivot his approach. He fixed a crooked smile on his face and lobbed what he clearly thought would be the finishing blow, a pointed question referencing an incident from years ago in which Eastwood had openly criticized certain political figures. By resurrecting the memory, Cameron hoped to pin Eastwood as a figure who was, in his words, part of Hollywood's problem. The insinuation was that Eastwood's generation, with its particular brand of boldness and lack of social media sensitivity, was preventing the industry from truly aligning with progressive values. The rhetorical trap was set, and Cameron waited for Eastwood to tumble into it. Instead, Eastwood addressed the moment with the unflappable air of a man who had faced more formidable challenges than a spirited talk show host. He went back to the example Cameron had mentioned, clearly recalling the event. He explained why he'd said what he said, providing context that the headlines at the time had conveniently ignored. He underscored that debate without nuance was simply noise. People often missed the root of his message, which had more to do with personal responsibility and self-reliance than anything else. Looking straight into the camera, Eastwood said that society should be able to handle direct criticism if it wanted to improve and grow stronger. His words resonated in the studio, capturing the attention of those who had tuned in expecting a verbal bloodbath. Cameron, feeling the exchange slip out of his grip, tried turning the conversation toward Eastwood's personal life. He made an offhand remark about the age gap between Eastwood and some of his romantic partners in the past, a comment that felt like a blatant low blow. The host's eyes flickered with triumph for a moment, as though he believed he'd found a weak spot. But Eastwood's expression didn't change, and he responded with a measured dignity. Without going into unnecessary detail, he acknowledged having led a complex personal life that had, on occasion, provided fodder for the tabloids. He refused to make excuses for himself or dissect his romantic history in the name of sensational television. Another pocket of the crowd applauded his candor, and this time the applause swelled longer and louder. Cameron tapped his polished shoes on the stage floor, frustration creeping across his face. Several times, he tried to cut Eastwood off mid-sentence, but Eastwood, now more animated, deftly steered the conversation back to broader themes. He wanted to discuss the fabric of American storytelling, the importance of letting characters exist in their full complexity, and the necessary risk-taking behind any creative endeavor. He defended his filmography as an exploration of human nature rather than a presentation of strict moral absolutes. Words like redemption, forgiveness, and consequence flowed with a seasoned grace. The audience found themselves drawn in, even those who initially came expecting or hoping Eastwood might falter. The talk show host was left grasping for a knockout punch. He was known for putting on a show, pulling up old tweets, embarrassing behind-the-scenes clips, or sensational confessions. He tried a new angle, referencing claims made by former colleagues of Eastwood who supposedly described him as stubborn or unyielding on set. Yet Eastwood responded by highlighting that a steadfast sense of direction in film production was often confused with stubbornness. It was about having a unified vision and ensuring everyone worked together cohesively. He diplomatically mentioned that every filmmaker who strives for excellence encounters friction with others who see things differently. That was part of the creative process, and it didn't mean personal animosity. The explanation was cogent, demonstrating a sense of maturity that circumvented the usual traps. Cameron's carefully staged attempts to blindside Eastwood with tough personal questions and politically charged attacks began to falter, one after another. The audience sensed an energy shift. In fact, some watchers found themselves growing sympathetic toward Eastwood, who was fielding the onslaught with remarkable composure. The tension in the room no longer crackled with the promise of a dramatic takedown. Instead, viewers at home and in the studio began to admire Eastwood's refusal to engage in petty theatrics. As the interview wore on, social media platforms began to buzz with updates and video clips. Twitter and Instagram feeds flooded with short bursts of Eastwood's measured responses, capturing his unwavering stoicism in the face of provocation. Where some interviewees might have stumbled or lashed out, Eastwood delivered a masterclass in controlled discourse. Commentators online labeled it a prime example of handling conflict without succumbing to anger. Even people who were no fans of his political stance gave him credit for staying true to his beliefs without devolving into name-calling. His calm disposition felt like a stark contrast to many media spectacles that ended in shouting matches. This unexpected twist drew even more attention to the interview. Fans of Eastwood's film legacy jumped into the fray to show support, while critics weighed in on whether Cameron's questions had crossed ethical or professional lines. The viral clips had begun to take on a life of their own. Desperate to regain the upper hand, Cameron took a calculated risk in the final segment. He called attention to a rumor that Eastwood had clashed with a younger co-star on set because of ideological differences. Supposedly, Eastwood had given the individual an ultimatum to shape up or walk away from the project. Cameron wanted to use this anecdote to portray Eastwood as a domineering figure, one who bullied others into submitting to his worldview. Eastwood sighed, looking slightly weary of the repeated attempts to twist anecdotes into negative narratives. He responded that everyone was welcome to their own political beliefs, but if the atmosphere on set became so contentious that it hindered the work, decisions had to be made for the sake of the film's quality. He calmly clarified that the rumor exaggerated the situation and that he had no interest in controlling anyone's political stance. The hush in the audience grew more profound as Eastwood's side of the story painted a more humane picture than the rumor Cameron had wielded. Cameron, running out of time and fresh angles, decided to press forward with one final push, one last attempt to humiliate. He questioned Eastwood's relevance in the modern cinematic landscape, implying that younger generations might see him as a relic of a different time, overshadowed by new names and changing tastes. The question hung in the air, brazen and dismissive. Eastwood let out a small chuckle, his eyes twinkling with surprising humor. In that moment, he looked every bit the seasoned actor who understood the value of comedic timing. He glanced at the floor, then locked eyes with Cameron, and delivered a reply that left everyone momentarily speechless. He said that in a constantly changing industry, relevance wasn't determined by age or trendiness, but by authenticity and the ability to connect with audiences on a human level. He pointed out that stories of courage, love, fear, sacrifice, and hope were ageless, and so too were the storytellers who captured them honestly. If the younger generation found meaning or inspiration in his films, that was a gift. If not, they had the freedom to gravitate toward different art. What mattered was having a variety of voices, experiences, and styles in the industry. He ended by thanking Cameron for allowing him the chance to clarify his stance and for sparking a dialogue, even though it had been fraught with tension. It was more than a gracious acknowledgement. It was the final pivot that allowed him to exit the stage in control of the narrative. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause that was impossible to ignore, even as the camera closed in on Cameron's face. The host's usually smug grin faltered for a moment. A few sympathetic watchers might have felt some pity for Cameron, who had clearly been outmaneuvered in a battle he'd expected to dominate. But this was live television, and the moment was irreversible. Cameron thanked Eastwood in a tone that tried to mimic politeness, but the edge in his voice betrayed a simmering frustration. The show cut to a commercial break, and stagehands hurried onto the set to prep for the next segment. Off camera, Eastwood stood up, exchanged polite farewells with the host and the producers, and shook a few hands on his way backstage. The real explosion happened as soon as the show's social media team posted the interview highlights. Clips of Eastwood's calm yet sharp responses spread across major platforms at a dizzying speed. Within hours, hashtags popped up linking to the interview footage, drawing in viewers who might have initially paid no mind. The highlight reel featured every tense exchange, culminating in Eastwood's final remarks about relevance and authentic storytelling. That succinct summary of his stance reverberated with surprising power across the internet, generating debate among people of varying political stripes. Social media personalities weighed in on the saga, praising Eastwood for his composure and blasting Cameron for resorting to cheap shots. Some called it a masterclass in maintaining dignity under pressure. Others described it as a symbolic clash between old-school Hollywood grit and modern sensationalism. Some progressive voices jumped in to argue that Eastwood's brand of old-fashioned values needed more scrutiny, but even they conceded that Cameron's tactics had come across as heavy-handed. It was rare to see such a broad swath of internet users find common ground, but this interview managed to unify them, at least momentarily, around the idea that the conversation had become more about respect and less about who won the argument. Memes followed, as they often do in viral internet moments. Images of Clint Eastwood seated stoically with text capturing his final retort flew around Twitter and Instagram. The phrase, "age is not the enemy of relevance," trended for a few days, especially among older creatives who thanked Eastwood for addressing the subtle ageism they felt in their industries. Younger fans of Eastwood dug up old clips and photos from his storied career, forging a strange but uplifting alliance of multiple generations who found something admirable in the legend's unruffled stance. Even mainstream media outlets took notice, inviting cultural commentators to discuss the segment's significance in the broader context of Hollywood's changing landscape. Cameron faced a barrage of reactions as well. Some of his loyal viewers defended him, claiming that tough questions are part of a talk show host's job. Others felt uneasy about his repeated attempts to embarrass Eastwood, pointing out moments that came across as petty rather than investigative. Ratings for that particular episode had skyrocketed, ironically ensuring that Cameron's producers would be thrilled about the attention. But critics lamented that such sensational gotcha tactics overshadowed more meaningful discourse. In the aftermath, Cameron issued a half-hearted statement saying he respected Eastwood and recognized his contributions to film history. He insisted that his questions were part of a broader journalistic approach aimed at unveiling the truth, but the damage was done, and the narrative that the host had tried to humiliate a legend only to be calmly put in his place proved unstoppable. Eastwood, for his part, carried on with his routine, appearing unbothered by the swirl of online chatter. The next morning, he was spotted at a local coffee shop, politely signing autographs and offering a friendly nod to fans who congratulated him on the interview. A few people, older than him in some cases, joked that he'd set a new standard for patience under fire. He merely smiled, shrugged off the praise, and continued about his day. Reporters asked whether he had seen the online reaction. He commented that he appreciated people taking an interest in dialogue, but that he wasn't one to chase viral moments or dwell on them. In the weeks that followed, invitations for additional high-profile interviews flooded Eastwood's team, each host hoping to replicate the viewership success. Producers from rival networks wanted a piece of that viral lightning, believing that Eastwood's presence might spark another dramatic cultural moment. True to form, Eastwood carefully chose his media appearances, favoring environments where he could discuss his craft and perspective without devolving into combative theatrics. His refusal to reduce himself to clickbait only magnified the respect many now held for him. The memory of that tense talk show encounter loomed large, a testament to how skillfully he had kept his composure. Meanwhile, Cameron's show attempted to pivot and capitalize on the momentum. The following episodes featured a series of guests from various walks of life: politicians, reality stars, up-and-coming actors, and the host attempted to orchestrate similarly provocative segments. Yet nothing seemed to match the electricity of the Eastwood exchange. Audiences had already seen Cameron's strategy in action, and repeating it felt stale. The unpredictability and genuine tension that had marked Eastwood's appearance simply couldn't be replicated, especially as future guests either put up stronger boundaries or, conversely, avoided the show altogether, wary of its reputation for adversarial confrontation. Within a month, the interview had become a staple case study in media circles. Journalism students were encouraged to watch and analyze the power dynamics at play, dissecting each question and answer. Public relations teams pointed to Eastwood's performance as an ideal scenario for crisis communication, staying cool under stress, addressing pointed allegations head-on, and never losing sight of one's core message. Some insisted it was the perfect illustration of how to navigate a realm of sound bites, clickbait articles, and viral tweets without compromising one's integrity. Critics, both conservative and liberal, mused that if more public figures adopted Eastwood's calm style of discourse, political debates might be less toxic. Others argued that Eastwood was afforded the respect of a Hollywood legend, an advantage not everyone could wield. Even so, a consensus formed that the talk show had inadvertently served a higher purpose. It reminded viewers that disagreements do not have to be devolved into personal attacks. Though Cameron had certainly tried, Eastwood's refusal to respond with vitriol highlighted the benefits of thoughtful retorts over knee-jerk defensiveness. Months later, when Eastwood's next film premiered to critical acclaim, interviewers inevitably brought up the infamous talk show moment, hungry for backstage gossip. Eastwood, displaying his usual reticence, downplayed the incident, saying Cameron was doing his job in a highly competitive market for viewership. He admitted that he preferred more respectful conversations, but he bore no ill will toward the host. The most he would say on the subject was that if people found inspiration or entertainment in how he handled tough questions, he was grateful. But his priority remained on storytelling and finding new, meaningful projects to direct and act in. Actions, not viral comebacks. Cameron, for his part, struggled to shake off the reputation of having mishandled the Eastwood interview. Despite his attempts to rebrand himself as a champion of tough but fair questions, the clip of Eastwood's final comments continued to surface. It showed up in montages about iconic television moments and was frequently shared by Eastwood's admirers as proof of his enduring relevance. While Cameron continued to have a career, the overshadowing memory of that night hovered persistently, reminding him that bombastic showmanship could backfire when matched against genuine composure. Some members of the public even speculated that the entire interview might have been orchestrated for publicity, though that theory seemed to disintegrate when glimpses of the raw frustration in Cameron's eyes were replayed. Insiders confirmed that he had genuinely believed he could corner Eastwood, only to discover that the star's resilience was more than he'd bargained for. The raw authenticity of Eastwood's responses only heightened the interview's impact, turning it into a cultural reference point for televised confrontations. Over time, the phenomenon settled into pop culture legend, referenced in comedic skits and online parodies. Clips circulated every few months, especially whenever a new celebrity faced a similarly combative interview. Eastwood's stoic face and that wry final smile became shorthand for anyone who refused to let provocation shatter their equanimity. As for the liberal talk show host who tried and failed to humiliate him, the ordeal served as a humbling lesson in the power of respect, focus, and a lifetime of hard-earned confidence. That night in Los Angeles left an enduring mark, not simply because of viral fame, but because it showcased the rare moment when a public figure sidestepped the usual traps of outrage culture. One man, guided by a storied career and an unshakable sense of self, demonstrated that dignity under fire could resonate more than any flashy soundbite. While some stories fade with time, this particular interview, powered by Eastwood's quiet but decisive clapback, took on a life of its own. the internet made sure it wouldn't be forgotten, weaving it into the evolving tapestry of modern media. And for those who watched it live, it became a reminder that truth, authenticity, and respect can still triumph, even in an era dominated by spectacle. In the aftermath of the viral interview, Clint Eastwood remained largely unfazed by the media storm that followed. While journalists, social commentators, and internet personalities dissected every moment of the exchange, Eastwood himself moved on without indulging in any victory laps or prolonged reflections. He wasn't the type to bask in social media trends or chase fleeting internet fame. In his world, work spoke louder than words, and a single conversation, no matter how widely discussed, was just that, a conversation. However, the cultural impact of the interview continued to ripple across entertainment and political discourse. Late-night hosts referenced it in their monologues, sometimes poking fun at Cameron Reed's failed attempts to rattle Eastwood. Political analysts on both sides of the spectrum used it as a teaching moment. Conservatives championed Eastwood's calm, direct responses as an example of unshaken resolve, while progressives debated whether Cameron's approach had ultimately backfired, costing them a moment to meaningfully challenge Eastwood's views. Social media remained ablaze with think pieces and commentary, and YouTube clips of the most intense moments racked up millions of views. Despite the waves of reactions, the most intriguing aspect of the entire ordeal was the public's unanimous respect for Eastwood's handling of the situation. Even among those who disagreed with his political leanings or previous statements, there was admiration for his refusal to engage in hostility or defensiveness. The conversation wasn't about partisan politics anymore. It had transformed into a broader discussion about discourse, respect, and the art of staying composed under pressure. As time passed, the interview began to be referenced in professional settings outside of Hollywood and political media. Business seminars, public relations workshops, and leadership training programs cited it as an example of emotional intelligence, effective communication, and mastering one's public image. Media trainers used it to teach clients how to navigate tough interviews without being flustered. Professors of communications studies introduced it into their courses, pointing to Eastwood's approach as an alternative to reactionary or aggressive debate tactics. His demeanor became a case study in self-control, how to hold firm without losing composure, how to engage in discourse without escalating into hostility. Cameron Reed, for his part, faced an uncomfortable reckoning with his own professional brand. Though his ratings initially saw a spike due to the virality of the interview, subsequent episodes failed to capture the same level of engagement. Viewers began noticing a pattern in his approach: sensationalism over substance, provocation over meaningful dialogue. With the interview as a defining moment in his career, his public perception shifted. Some longtime fans remained loyal, but a new wave of viewers, especially those who had never been fond of Eastwood but found themselves unexpectedly impressed, began tuning out. Even some media colleagues privately acknowledged that Cameron had miscalculated, underestimating the power of someone who didn't rely on theatrics to make an impact. Months later, when Eastwood was asked in another interview about his thoughts on the entire ordeal, he merely shrugged. He said he never went into that studio expecting to win anything. He had simply gone to have a conversation. "People can take from it what they want," he said. "I just said what I felt was right." His disinterest in fueling further debate only cemented his reputation as someone who had nothing to prove. And in an era where media storms came and went in rapid succession, his response became the ultimate lesson: true strength isn't in volume, but in unwavering certainty. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the talk show host trying to humiliate Clint Eastwood? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.